Before this video disappears into the shadows, like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you'd do if the manhunt was already too late. The first crack in the walls. The sirens were already screaming when the guard realized the cell was empty. At 2:17 a.m., deep inside Jostadt prison in Vienna, Officer Lucas Brandner stood frozen in front of cell 43. The door was locked. The light was on. The bed was neatly made. But Marcus Kovac, convicted armed robber, violent repeat offender, was gone. No broken bars. No shattered locks. Just a faint smell of cleaning solvent and a security camera looping the same 5 seconds of footage over and over again. By sunrise, the city was buzzing with rumors. By noon, the Austrian Interior Ministry issued a quiet alert to border checkpoints. And by nightfall, the truth no one wanted to admit began to surface. This was an escape. It was an extraction. Detective Anna Weiss was pulled from a homicide case and reassigned within hours. She had spent 15 years with Vienna's Criminal Investigation Department, long enough to recognize panic when she saw it. The prison warden wouldn't meet her eyes. The guard spoke in fragments. And every security log she requested came back incomplete. "Has anyone checked the maintenance tunnels?" she asked. The room went silent. Jostadt was old, older than most of the men locked inside it. Beneath its stone foundations ran tunnels built during World War II, some sealed, some forgotten, some supposedly collapsed. According to official records, every access point had been reinforced years ago. According to reality, no one had checked in over a decade. When Weiss descended into the tunnel network with a forensic team, they found fresh boot prints in the dust. Civilian shoes. Expensive ones. Not prison issue. And then they found something worse. A cut fiber optic cable, surgically clean. Someone had disabled the cameras manually, from inside the walls. Kovac's file painted him as muscle, not a mastermind. But Weiss knew better than to underestimate a man who survived 3 prison stints without ever finishing his sentence. Still, one thing didn't add up. Why him? The answer came faster than anyone expected. 3 days later, a second inmate vanished from Stein prison, nearly 200 kilometers away. Different facility, different security system, same pattern. Locked cell, looping footage, no signs of forced entry. The media exploded. Is Austria losing control of its prisons? 2 escapes, 0 answers. A national security failure? Behind closed doors, officials downplayed it as coincidence. Weiss didn't buy it. She spread case files across her desk, searching for overlap, crimes, gangs, financial trails. Then she saw the date. Both inmates had testified, quietly, years earlier, against the same private security contractor during a corruption inquiry that went nowhere. The contractor's name had been buried, the case dismissed, the witnesses sent to different prisons. Until now, by the end of the month, there were 6 escapes. 6, not riots, not violent breakouts. Just men walking out of maximum security facilities, as if the doors had been opened for them. Interpol called. Europol followed. Austria's prisons were officially labeled compromised. Inside the CID, whispers turned into accusations. Someone was feeding information. Someone had access to internal layouts, shift rotations, blind spots. And someone was being paid very well. Weiss began interviewing guards. One of them broke. A junior officer confessed he'd been instructed by a supervisor to ignore certain maintenance alarms. Another admitted to escorting contractors through restricted areas without paperwork. When Weiss pressed for names, they suddenly couldn't remember. Fear does that to people. The 7th escape changed everything. The inmate wasn't a career criminal. He was an accountant, convicted of financial fraud, nonviolent, barely known. His disappearance didn't make headlines until Weiss opened his confiscated personal effects. Inside a false bottom notebook, she found a handwritten list, 22 names, dates next to each one, and a note scrawled at the bottom in careful, deliberate handwriting. They're not breaking out. They're being collected. Weiss stared at the list as the weight of it settled in. 22 scheduled extractions, 22 prisoners. And if the dates were accurate, 15 more were still inside. She looked up at her team, her voice barely steady. Lock down every facility. Now. But it was already too late. Because as alarms began to sound across the country, a call came in from Graz prison, Austria's most secure facility. Another cell was empty, and this time, the security cameras were still recording. What they showed made even seasoned investigators step back in disbelief. Because the door hadn't been opened from the inside, it had been unlocked remotely, the system that let them walk. By the time dawn broke over Graz prison, Austria was no longer dealing with a security lapse. It was facing a coordinated breach of the justice system itself. Detective Anna Weiss stood in the control room, staring at the frozen frame on the monitor. The footage showed cell block D at 3:41 a.m. The door slid open smoothly, silently, as if obeying a routine command. The inmate stepped out, glanced once at the camera, and walked away without running. No masks, no panic. He knew exactly where he was going. The prison's digital logs told a terrifying story. The unlock command hadn't come from inside the prison. It had been routed through a remote access port reserved for emergency system updates, an access point known only to senior administrators, and one private contractor responsible for modernization upgrades across Austria's prison network. The same contractor from the old corruption case. Weiss requested an immediate warrant. By noon, federal investigators raided the contractor's Vienna headquarters. What they found wasn't subtle. Servers wiped clean. Hard drives missing. Offices abandoned in a hurry. Coffee cups still warm. Papers half shredded. It looked less like a business closure and more like a controlled evacuation. Then came the first body. A maintenance supervisor named Peter Halden was found in his apartment bathroom that evening. The official cause was ruled a suicide, but Weiss didn't need a coroner's report to know better. The window was locked from the inside. There was no note, and carved faintly into the steam fog mirror was a single word: compliance. Halden had signed off on tunnel inspections at 3 prisons where escapes occurred. Now he was dead. The task force expanded overnight. Europol analysts flooded in, mapping patterns across prison transfers, sentencing records, and financial disclosures. One conclusion became unavoidable. This wasn't about freeing criminals. It was about silencing liabilities. Every escaped inmate shared a hidden trait. They had knowledge, direct or indirect, of financial crimes tied to shell companies' offshore accounts and defense contracts stretching across Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. They weren't being rescued to live free. They were being erased. Interpol issued quiet alerts to the escaped men, but sightings were scarce. One man was spotted in Slovenia near the border, then vanished. Another's DNA surfaced in a burned-out vehicle in northern Italy, but the body inside wasn't his. Someone was cleaning the trail. Inside the CID, Weiss began to suspect the rot went deeper. Evidence requests stalled. Surveillance approvals were delayed. Her emails went unanswered. Then her office was searched, without authorization. Nothing was taken. Nothing obvious, at least. But someone had moved her files, reordered them, left them just wrong enough to send a message. We're watching you. That night, Weiss received a call from an unlisted number. You're looking at the wrong exits, a man said calmly. The tunnels aren't how they're leaving. The line went dead. The next morning, she reviewed shipping records, prison kitchens, medical supply deliveries, waste disposal schedules, anything that entered or exited daily without scrutiny. That's when she found it. A logistics company contracted to transport biohazard waste from multiple prisons, owned by a holding group registered under a maze of shell corporations. The same group had quietly acquired stakes in the private security contractor years earlier. Prisoners weren't walking out. They were being moved out, sedated, logged as medical transfers, loaded into sealed containers no one ever inspected twice. And according to customs data, those containers didn't stop at borders. They disappeared. As Weiss prepared to brief the task force, another shock hit the media. A leaked internal report confirmed what officials had denied for months. 22 prison escapes in 1 year. Not rumors. Not speculation. Confirmed. Public trust collapsed overnight. Protests erupted outside correctional facilities. Guards quit. Politicians blamed one another. And in the chaos, the final phase of the operation began. 3 inmates vanished in a single night. Different prisons, different regions, same hour. Weiss raced to stop the next extraction on the list, the 21st name, a former procurement officer turned state witness, scheduled for transfer the following morning. She arrived at the prison personally, overriding objections, demanding lockdown. Too late. The infirmary bed was empty. The floor still dripped, and taped beneath the mattress was a folded piece of paper written in the same precise handwriting she'd seen before. You can't arrest the system. Weiss felt the ground shift beneath her. This wasn't a criminal network operating in the shadows. It was infrastructure, contracts, protocols, legal signatures. The final name on the list stared back at her from the page. Not a prisoner, an investigator. Her investigator. And in that moment, as alarms echoed through yet another prison corridor, Anna Weiss realized the most dangerous escape hadn't happened yet. It was scheduled, and it involved someone on her own team. The last door never locked. The final escape wasn't chaotic. It was quiet. Detective Anna Weiss arrived at CID headquarters before sunrise, the city still wrapped in winter fog. She hadn't slept. The list sat folded in her coat pocket, like a loaded weapon. 22 names. 21 already gone. The last one was circled in red. Daniel Kruger, her lead analyst, her closest ally, the man who had helped her connect the tunnels, the contractors, the shell companies, the man who had stood beside her in briefing rooms and promised they would stop this. At 6:04 a.m., Kruger didn't badge into the building. At 6:12, his government-issued phone went dark. Weiss ran. By the time she reached his apartment, the door was unlocked. Inside, everything was immaculate. Too immaculate. No signs of a struggle. No forced entry. His laptop sat open on the kitchen table, screen frozen on a single folder titled Final Audit. She opened it. Inside were transaction logs tying the prison contractor, the biohazard logistics company, and a defense procurement firm to the same offshore trust. Payments disguised as infrastructure upgrades. Emergency system patches. Modernization. It was a revolving door legality. Kruger hadn't been compromised. He had been embedded. A timestamp blinked at the bottom of the screen. A file uploaded 37 minutes earlier. A video. Kruger sat facing the camera, expression calm, resigned. If you're watching this, he said, then the system worked exactly as designed. He explained everything. The escapes weren't failures. They were contingency plans. Each inmate represented a risk exposure. Witnesses, accountants, middlemen, loose ends. The prisons weren't breached. They were used. When people think of corruption, Kruger said, they imagine criminals hiding from the law. The truth is worse. The law is what hides them. He named names. Ministers, executives, oversight officials. And then came the final sentence. I volunteered to be the last one. Weiss felt the air leave her lungs. Across the city, alarms began to ring, but not from a prison, from a courthouse. Federal police stormed the building as Kruger's video hit secured servers, autos sent to international watchdogs, foreign prosecutors, and media outlets with instructions to release. His heart rate monitor went flat. In the underground garage, they found his car, still warm. Inside the trunk was a biohazard container identical to the ones used in prison transfers. Empty, clean, logged for disposal. At 9:47 a.m., the Austrian interior minister resigned. By noon, arrests began. Not inmates, officials, contractors, executives. The architecture of the operation collapsed in public view, piece by piece. The narrative shifted from escapes to state-enabled erasures. But there was one question no one could answer. Where were the prisoners? Weeks passed. Some bodies were found. Unidentified remains in remote industrial sites. Burned vehicles, anonymous graves. Others were never located. Officially listed as fugitives. Unofficially understood to be gone forever. As for Kruger, his body was never recovered. The final report concluded the operation had ended. Weiss knew better. 3 months later, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a prison access card, active, issued that morning, and a note written in the same careful handwriting she would never forget. You closed the doors they knew about. She stared at the card, pulse pounding, understanding the truth that would never make it into any report. The crisis hadn't exposed a broken system. It had exposed a functioning one. Somewhere, another list was being written, and somewhere, a door was unlocking without a sound. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe now, because some systems don't fail. They wait